At the dawn of humanity, when the world was completely different and the climate was unpredictable, not two but three populations of humans roamed Europe and Asia. Two of them were us, Homo sapiens, and our close but long-extinct relatives, the Neanderthals. Their story is one of survival in harsh conditions, but also one of conflict that lasted for thousands of years. For a long time, our paths crossed in the same territory. Did relationships based on cooperation and knowledge exchange develop between us? Or was it a merciless struggle for limited resources and, ultimately, for the right to exist? Watch the video to the end to find out how modern archaeologists and geneticists are uncovering the darkest chapter in human history and what really happened between the two branches of the human family. For a long time, Neanderthals were portrayed in popular culture as primitive, crude creatures with low intellectual development. This view was formed in the early 20th century based on the first discoveries, which were misinterpreted. In fact, Neanderthals were an incredibly adaptable and intelligent species, capable of surviving the harsh conditions of the Ice Age. They possessed complex tool-making techniques, used fire for heating and cooking, built shelters from bones and skins, and created jewelry from animal claws and feathers, which indicates that they had symbolic thinking and aesthetic sense. The tools found in various parts of Europe and Asia demonstrate a high level of craftsmanship. Sharp spearheads, scrapers for processing skins, and blades all testify to a deep understanding of materials and technology. They knew how to use flint to create sharp cutting tools and how to use wood to make strong and reliable bows. Their social structure was complex and cohesive. They cared for the wounded and sick members of their tribe, as evidenced by the discovery of skeletons with healed fractures and other injuries that required long-term care. This suggests empathy and mutual aid within the group. They had their own rituals and possibly even beliefs, as evidenced by carefully planned burials with objects such as shells or flowers left next to the bodies. These findings challenge our outdated view of Neanderthals as savages. Modern research shows that their brains were no smaller than ours, and in some cases even larger, which calls into question the idea of our intellectual superiority. What do you think is the biggest misconception about Neanderthals that still lives on in our minds? Write your answer in the comments. Recent genetic research has also shown that Neanderthals were capable of speech, although the structure of their vocal apparatus differed from ours. The presence of a hyoid bone similar to ours and specific genes associated with speech suggests that they may have communicated with each other using a complex language. Moreover, analysis of Neanderthal DNA has revealed that their ancestors interbred with ours, resulting in many modern humans, especially those of non-African descent, having between 1% and 4% Neanderthal genes. These genes influence our immune system, skin color, and even our predisposition to certain diseases. Thus, Neanderthals are not just an extinct species, but part of our own genetic heritage. About 45,000 years ago, the first waves of Homo sapiens began to penetrate the territory of Eurasia, which was already home to Neanderthals. For thousands of years, these two populations lived side by side, and their fates were closely intertwined. Their territories overlapped, and they inevitably clashed with each other. They were forced to compete for the same resources: water sources, fertile land for gathering plants, and, of course, large animals, which formed the basis of their diet. It was not just a struggle for territory, but a struggle for survival. Each species had its advantages and disadvantages, and they had to constantly adapt to changing conditions. Archaeological excavations in various regions, from Eastern Europe to Siberia, show that the tools of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals are often found in the same soil layers. This means that they lived at the same time and in the same places. Imagine two different species of humans with different cultures and different skills, sharing the same valley, the same cave. What were their encounters like? Were they brief and accidental, or long and hostile? Were there conflicts between them, or did they simply avoid each other? What if these encounters were not just chance meetings, but part of a larger process? To answer these questions, we need to look at the traces left on the bones. However, it was not just a confrontation. There is also evidence of cultural exchange between the two species. At some sites where Neanderthals lived, tools characteristic of Homo sapiens have been found, and vice versa. This may indicate that they learned technologies from each other and perhaps even exchanged ideas. For example, Some archaeological finds indicate that Neanderthals may have learned from Homo sapiens how to make more advanced stone tools, as well as hunting methods and the use of symbols. It was a complex and multifaceted process of interaction that was not limited to competition. Perhaps the most convincing evidence of interaction between the two species came from finds in caves in France and Spain. Neanderthal bones were found in these places with marks that could not have been left by predators or natural processes. These were neat, precise cuts made with stone tools used for butchering animals. These marks indicate careful processing similar to that used for butchering mammoths, bison, and deer. Scientists found that Neanderthal bones, particularly skull bones and tubular bones, had characteristic marks indicating that muscles and tendons had been removed and bone marrow extracted. The same marks are regularly found on the bones of mammoths, bison, and deer hunted by early Homo sapiens. This fact made scientists think about the nature of these interactions. Were these actions part of a ritual? Or were they direct acts of competition where one group of people displaced another, using them as a resource for survival? If we assume that early Homo sapiens could process Neanderthal remains, what other evidence could support this hypothesis? New research shows that such marks on Neanderthal bones may be evidence not only of cannibalism, but also of other, more complex forms of interaction. In the Le Peyrard cave in France, Neanderthal skulls were found that had been processed in such a way that they could be used as bowls or vessels. This may indicate that Homo sapiens had certain ritual practices associated with defeated enemies. Moreover, in the Cima de los Huesos cave in Spain, Neanderthal bones were found with marks that, according to some scientists, may be the result of deliberate destruction of enemies. These findings challenge our understanding of early Homo sapiens and their relationships with other human species. The technologies used by the two populations were similar but not identical. Neanderthals created tools that were versatile, such as choppers and scrapers, suitable for a variety of tasks. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, developed more specialized and refined tools such as thin blades, bone needles, and harpoons. These differences in technology indicate differences in hunting strategies and lifestyles. Homo sapiens tools were more effective, allowing them to hunt smaller and faster prey and to process skins and other materials more efficiently. This technological gap may have been a decisive factor in the struggle for survival. In some caves, archaeologists have found traces where Neanderthal tools coexist with Homo sapiens tools. This paints a picture where two cultures existed in close proximity and may have even exchanged technologies. But how did these technological differences affect the fate of the two species when they found themselves in the same territory? The answer may lie in some very unexpected discoveries. The technological innovations of Homo sapiens gave them a significant advantage. Their specialized tools, such as harpoons, allowed them to successfully hunt fish and marine mammals, expanding their diet and providing more stable food sources, which was especially important during periods of climate change. In addition, bone needles indicate the development of sewing and the creation of warmer and more complex clothing, which increased their survival rate in the harsh conditions of the Ice Age. This technological flexibility and ability to adapt may have been one of the key factors that allowed Homo sapiens to supplant Neanderthals. The most surprising evidence of interaction between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals came not from archaeology, but from genetics. Modern research has shown that the genome of every human, except for indigenous Africans, contains between 1 and 4% Neanderthal DNA. This suggests that interbreeding occurred between the two populations. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens did not just live side by side, they sometimes formed families and had children. This discovery completely changes our understanding of their relationship. They were not just enemies or competitors, they were also neighbors, partners, and perhaps even friends. Gene transfer could have occurred in both directions, and each species could have adopted useful traits from the other. For example, some Neanderthal genes that we have inherited are linked to the immune system and adaptation to cold climates. This means that interbreeding not only occurred but was also beneficial to our survival. Genetic research allows us to look back into the past and see that mixing occurred not just once, but repeatedly over thousands of years. This suggests that contact between the two species was regular and widespread. Scientists have discovered that the Neanderthal genes we inherited influence many aspects of our health and appearance. For example, Some of them are associated with hair and skin color, as well as with the risk of developing certain diseases, such as type 2 diabetes. This shows how deeply rooted this legacy is in our genetic code. Thus, Neanderthals did not disappear without a trace, but continued to exist within us. This discovery forces us to rethink the entire history of humanity and acknowledge that we are not the only species to have left its mark on this planet. In addition to their practical uses, Neanderthal bones may have been used for ritual or symbolic purposes. For example, Neanderthal skulls have been found in some caves that have been modified in ways that are not directly related to food preparation. They show traces that may have been part of a ritual or ceremony. In some cases, the bones were painted with ochre, a natural pigment used to create rock paintings and decorations. These findings indicate that interaction with Neanderthal remains was more complex than simply obtaining resources. Perhaps Homo sapiens saw Neanderthals as more than just prey. Perhaps they considered them equals, possessors of special powers or knowledge that they wanted to appropriate. Bone processing may have been a way to absorb this power or express respect for the deceased. But what was the true nature of these interactions? The answer may lie in the most unexpected finds. Symbolic thinking and ritual practices are among the key hallmarks of a complex culture, and such findings may indicate that early Homo sapiens already possessed these traits. The use of ochre to paint bones, for example, may have been part of a ritual designed to appease the spirit of the deceased or express sympathy. This may also indicate that Homo sapiens viewed Neanderthals as beings with souls, which calls into question the idea of their complete extermination. Other finds, such as necklaces made from animal teeth and shells found at Neanderthal sites, show that Neanderthals themselves possessed symbolic thinking. This further emphasizes that they were not primitive savages, but a complex and developed species that could interact with Homo sapiens on different levels. Our arrival in Europe and Asia coincided with the gradual disappearance of Neanderthals, and this was hardly a coincidence. There are several hypotheses explaining why Neanderthals disappeared from the historical stage. One of the main reasons is considered to be competition for resources. Homo sapiens were more numerous and better adapted to a variety of conditions, which gave them an advantage in the struggle for food. Another hypothesis is related to climate change. Neanderthals were adapted to the cold climate of the Ice Age, but when the climate began to change, it was more difficult for them to adapt to the new conditions. Homo sapiens, on the other hand, had a wider range of resources and were more mobile, which allowed them to adapt successfully to new conditions. Assimilation cannot be ruled out either. Small groups of Neanderthals may have gradually merged into larger populations of Homo sapiens, leaving their mark on our genome. One of the leading theories is demographic pressure. Homo sapiens arrived in new territories in greater numbers than Neanderthals, who lived in small, isolated groups. This meant that even without direct conflict, Homo sapiens simply took over more territory and resources, leaving Neanderthals with less and less space to exist. In addition, Homo sapiens had a more complex social structure and extensive trade networks, which allowed them to exchange resources and information over vast territories. This gave them an advantage in times of crisis, when Neanderthals, relying only on their small groups, found themselves isolated. Another important hypothesis is related to differences in diet and nutrition. Neanderthals were larger and needed more calories, which they obtained mainly from large animals. When these animals began to disappear due to climate change, Homo sapiens, with a more varied diet, fish, small animals, plants, were able to adapt better. Finally, there is a hypothesis that Neanderthals were more susceptible to diseases that Homo sapiens may have brought with them, which may also have played a role in their extinction. Despite genetic evidence of interbreeding, many findings point to direct competition and possibly clashes between the two species. At some Homo sapiens sites, artifacts made from Neanderthal bones have been found, suggesting that they viewed them as a resource. These artifacts may have been part of tools or jewelry, but their very existence suggests that Neanderthals were part of their ecosystem. In addition, some researchers suggest that Homo sapiens may have had an advantage in hunting. Their more advanced tools and social structure may have allowed them to hunt larger and faster prey, providing them with more food. This could have forced Neanderthals, who had less effective hunting methods, to survive in harsher conditions, ultimately leading to their extinction. This evidence of competition is complemented by findings indicating violence between the two species. Some Neanderthal skeletons have been found with injuries that could have been inflicted by Homo sapiens tools. For example, a Neanderthal skeleton with broken ribs, possibly caused by a spear, was found in the Shanidar cave in Iraq. Although such findings are not direct evidence of war, they indicate that conflicts between the two species were possible and probably did occur. Another piece of evidence for competition is the speed with which Homo sapiens spread across territories previously inhabited by Neanderthals. As Homo sapiens occupied new regions, Neanderthal populations in those regions rapidly decline. This may indicate that Homo sapiens were more successful at utilizing resources and displaced Neanderthals from their traditional habitats. Ultimately, a combination of these factors, including competition for resources, climate change, disease, and possibly direct violence, led to the extinction of Neanderthals, leaving Homo sapiens as the only species of humans on the planet. Modern technologies such as ancient DNA analysis and bone isotope analysis are allowing us to learn more about how Neanderthals and Homo sapiens lived. For example, isotope analysis has shown that the Neanderthal diet consisted mainly of large animal meat. This made them vulnerable to changes in the population of these animals. At the same time, the diet of Homo sapiens was more diverse, including fish, shellfish, and plants. This omnivorous diet gave them a survival advantage. New discoveries are also helping us better understand how interbreeding between the two populations occurred. Scientists have found that the Neanderthal genes we inherited are linked to important functions such as metabolism and adaptation to cold. This suggests that interbreeding not only occurred, but was also beneficial to our survival. Isotope analysis, in particular, has revolutionized our understanding of the diets of ancient humans. By studying the ratio of different isotopes, heavy and light atoms of the same element, in bones and teeth, we can determine with a high degree of accuracy what our ancestors ate. For Neanderthals, this analysis consistently shows high levels of nitrogen-15, which is characteristic of predators at the top of the food chain. This confirms that they were mainly hunters of large animals such as mammoths and woolly rhinos. Such narrow specialization made them very vulnerable. When climate change or overhunting caused these animal populations to decline, Neanderthals faced serious food shortages. At the same time, Homo sapiens had much more diverse isotopic signals, indicating a mixed diet that included fish, birds, small mammals, as well as plants and root vegetables. This omnivorous diet became their main advantage in the struggle for survival. They were able to adapt to any conditions and find food where Neanderthals starved. This is one of the most convincing pieces of evidence that Homo sapiens were more flexible and adaptable. Ultimately, Neanderthals left their mark not only on the genome of modern humans, but also on our culture. They were not just our predecessors, but our close relatives. Their story is one of survival, adaptation, and perhaps coexistence. We see their legacy in our genes, in our tools, and in our beliefs. Their story is part of our story. Understanding how they lived and why they disappeared helps us better understand who we are. Their disappearance reminds us of the fragility of life and how easy it is to lose everything. This legacy is evident not only on a biological level, but also on a cultural level. Modern research has shown that Neanderthals were not primitive savages, as they were once portrayed. They created jewelry, used ochre to paint their bodies, and may have had symbolic thinking. All of this forces us to rethink our attitude towards them. Instead of seeing them only as competitors, we should see them as an equal species that developed alongside us. Their history is part of our shared history, and their disappearance is a tragedy for all of humanity. Understanding that we were not alone on this planet makes us think about our place in the world and what might have happened if history had taken a different course. Perhaps we would be a different, more mixed population. Understanding their legacy, their lives, and their disappearance is not only of historical interest, but also an important lesson for us. The story of Neanderthals is not just a chapter in a textbook, but part of our own evolutionary chronicle. Their disappearance will forever remain one of humanity's most intriguing mysteries, and their legacy lives on in each of us. Every new discovery, whether it be ancient DNA analysis, isotopic bone studies, or archaeological excavations, turns our understanding of Neanderthals upside down. They were not primitive savages, but intelligent, adaptable, and socially complex beings who created tools, jewelry, and may have had their own rituals and beliefs. Their story is one of survival in the harshest conditions of the Ice Age and of encountering another, more numerous and technologically flexible species, us. Their disappearance will forever remain one of humanity's most intriguing mysteries, and their legacy lives on in each of us. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new discoveries and fascinating stories.